Tilling the ground on the creation of AI-generated images. Let me start by saying that when I use the abbreviation AI in my title, I'm not referring to the term artificial intelligence. I prefer to speak of algorithmic intelligence. The determination of what is natural and what is artificial is part of a fundamental discourse that distracts us. The essentialist agenda is one of labeling and classification, obscuring our view of what is actually happening. We are talking here about algorithms that are admittingly high-performing and developing, but that are still computer programs. They automatically execute instructions on how to do something. In computer science, there is a distinction made between weak and strong AI. The weak, which is also called narrow AI, can perform specific tasks, such as playing chess or Go, translating a text, or driving a car. The general, also called strong AI, on the other hand, would be able to solve any task. And I say would be because this general AI does not yet exist. The more efficiently and quickly an algorithm is, the more specified and narrow it is programmed. These algorithms perform differently than the universally thinking human being. Undeniably, they can perform logarithmic calculations at a superior speed. However, what surprises me is that this one talent is ascribed such a high value. Aren't there many other species that outperform humans in some way? The metaphor of the superhuman computer goes so far to consider our psychosocial collective existence soon to be inferior to the algorithmic existence. Having said that, I now come to the actually matter at hand. My presentation deals with the relationship between user and program when generating images. I'm not making an ontological claim yet, who knows. I merely examine the creative dimension of the human-non-human interaction. For this, I take a topological approach and propose a metaphor, namely that the process of creating AI-generated images resembles the work of a farmer or gardener. In a sense, digital technology has established itself as a ground, also in the Kantian sense. Within private, social, and scientific spheres, the cognitive capacity of algorithms provides a stern foundation for our thinking and doing. At times, it seems that it has even become the only ground for a possible future. So, what is the nature of this ground? What does its surface look like? Does it resemble a paved road with solid infrastructures, or the cultivated soil in which something grows? When I discuss this metaphor, I'm not just playing with words. The analogy appears to have transformative quality, since it points to a fundamental dilemma when evaluating high-performing algorithms. As you can see, my presentation consists of 3 parts. Since my argument is the result of a topological analysis, I will begin by explaining what that entails. It should become clear how topology helps to understand the operationality of form. For the second part, I brought some AI-generated images. These examples are intended to show the necessary dialogical character of the creative process. They also serve as evidence for my hypothesis, which I will elaborate on in the third part. I will introduce the topological concept of the ground, understood as deep surface, and relate it to the dialogical aspect of creation and growth. This presentation gives me the opportunity to evaluate the analogy of creative work with AI and gardening. We will see that this metaphor does bear a problematic aspect. However, it offers also an advantage since it affirms the user's agency and helps to assume responsibility when using AI. For some time now, I have been working on the concept of technology using a topological method. As the mathematics of forms and space, topology goes beyond geometry. In fact, it could be described as a qualitative geometry of continuity. While geometry focuses on quantitative information, such as length and angles, topology primarily considers the quality of form that remains under continuous change. The topological analysis of an object thus concerns the invariance of continuously reversible deformations. That sounds more complicated than it is. It's also easily illustrated. So let's assume we have a ball of modeling clay. Now, all the shapes that we can create with it without tearing the mass, reattaching new parts or folding it, are alike to one another. To be more precise, they are homeomorphic. The term combines the Greek homeos, meaning similar, and morphe, meaning form, shape, or appearance. The different forms, which are called manifolds, are reversible, so the ball can change into a cup and the other way around. In our case, the manifold ball and the manifold cup are homeomorphic. But they are also homeomorphic to other forms, like an apple or a fork. Now, all these manifolds belong to the topological class of the two-dimensional sphere. Two-dimensional, because everything else would be too complicated. We're just dealing with the surface at the moment. But of course, the two-dimensional sphere is only one topological class. A donut, for instance, isn't a sphere because it has a hole in the middle. It is a torus, and it is homeomorphic to a mug with a handle, or a swim ring, or a skeleton key. Thus, topology allows a new perspective when analyzing forms. In fact, the concept of the topological class indicates a technological dimension of a manifold. I have also an example for this. So we see a pin, a sewing needle, and a safety pin. They all belong to the genus needle. From a topological point of view, however, they are manifolds belonging to two different classes. The pin is a sphere, and the sewing needle is a torus. The safety pin is a sphere or a torus, depending on whether it is open or closed. These classes correlate with the technological ability of the form. The pin can pierce something and hold things together, attach itself to something. The sewing needle can do more. In addition to puncturing a hole, it can hold a thread with its eye. This allows us to pull threads through fabric and sew something together. The safety pin is a special case. Due to its topological transformability, it can hold an elastic band, pull it through a trouser waistband, or pin something together and then safely conceal its needle tip. Furthermore, sphere and torus can couple up and become an operational pair. So the topological characteristic of bolt and nut allow for them to connect and to become more than their parts. They are coupling as kinetic object that displays the rudimentary principle of a machine. I was intrigued when I learned this. My way of thinking is somewhat topological. In fact, we all have to deal with invariance between forms. Each time we move in space, our whole environment undergoes a morphological change. When we walk towards a tree, its shape becomes larger and wider, but we are able to summarize the change over time. We do not perceive the tree as a series of different tree shapes, but as one and the same tree from different angles over a certain period of time. Tim Ingold is likewise a topological thinker. His social, ecological analysis rests on his study of the life of lines, implying a whole ontology. He distinguishes between blob and line, examining them in terms of their ability to make contact and form bonds. According to Ingold, the logic of the blob brought forth the block chain container metaphor as master trope when it comes to explaining the composition of the world. What does it mean? Well, for once, individuals, here understood as blobs, can form aggregates, meaning blocks. A block could be a gathering, a social group, or society. The term block is used when talking about demonstrations, for example. Secondly, blobs can form change as structures. According to Ingold, these chains hold no energy connection. The tension on the whole does not influence the individual elements. A chain is a mobile yet inelastic structure. Thirdly, the blob resembles a container since it has an inside and an outside. Ingold is critical towards the block chain container metaphors. He does remind us that blobs can merge. In such synthesis, the blobs disappear in order to become a new one. One example is when copper and tin are transformed into bronze. But for Ingold, the blob logic is insufficient to explain the fabric of life. It is the line and the blob-line pair that offers explanations for the intertwined organic and social world. So in this drawing here, we see these two merging blobs, entanglement of lines, and a blob-line pair. I have to add that Ingold overlooks the fact that blobs, understood as topological spheres, have the ability to arrange themselves in chains also in an operative way. So here you see an example of the game Go. In Go, you have to form chains and have to surround the opponent, which stones will be taken from the board. So different than in chess, each stone acquires its specific properties only through its position in relation to the other stones. So there are no subjects. There's no queen, which moves in a way. There's no tower, which can do certain things. This example shows how one stone gathers all the power in order to free the space. Thus, blobs form not merely aggregates, but they can operate as part of a constellation. Besides that, blobs are also able to morph into lines. Blobs as line can fold and change their topological features. Here we see an example where a long-shaped sphere folds itself, turning into a torus with one hole, so genus 1, and folding again, turning into a torus with two holes, genus 2. However, I agree with Ingold about the importance of a topological approach that can explain the operationality of form. Ingold develops an ontology in which the line is a productive principle of life. The creative process and growth emerges from weavings. Lines form knots and become intertwined in flexible structures that make up the biological and social fabric of life. I agree that growth and movement cannot be explained by synthetic and additive relationships alone. Individuals are in one or the other way leaning into relations. I understand the blob line as coupling of two manifolds belonging to different topological classes. In this sense, blob and line form a functional pair like bolt and nut. Let this suffice as an introduction to the topological thinking. We will come back to that in a third part. Now I will show you some images and speak about my experience I had with the GIM image generator. So I went on the side of this OpenAI, Deep AI, so I think it's old, yeah? And I gave a prompt pencil drawing of a fork. I was surprised when I received the image on the left. It shows a narrow path in a forest with leafless trees whose trunks are partly intertwined. Yes, indeed, I forgot that with fork, I gave a misleading prompt, since it could mean both the cutlery fork and a forking path. I then tried the prompt pencil drawing fork on table, hoping that the probability for a cutlery fork would rise when bringing the reference of a table. The generated image shows a strange combination, a drawing of a forking cutlery fork. This image is intriguing, but it's not that I was aiming for. To be honest, the algorithms never really give me that what I was hoping for. My next attempt in this series was the prompt pencil drawing, fork and knife on a table, leading to an image with a sort of hybrid object of a forking fork knife. Well, at the time I didn't think I would use this example, so I don't have snapshots of the prompts and the image. I was, of course, also not able to recreate the images in the exact same way, but I brought some other examples. So in the upper left image, the prompt reads drawing of a fork. So the image shows a drawing of the rather unrealistic looking fork, which is standing or laying on top of some other spliced fork. Then in the upper right image, the prompt reads drawing of one fork. The image shows indeed one fork, but one with 7 or 8 tines. Even that is not clear since there's an optical illusion at play. So when you count from one side, it's a different amount than from the other side. In the lower left image, the prompt reads pencil drawing fork. So the image shows an abstract version of a meat fork with 3 tines, spliced with some other fork-like object. In the lower right image, the prompt reads pencil drawing, fork and knife on table. Finally, there is a drawing of at least one regular fork. Besides that, there are 2 fork-knife hybrids, but there isn't a knife that would characterize as a knife with a blade. I was slightly disappointed that I didn't get a forest path or something similar anymore, so I tried the following. The prompt for the left image reads, pencil drawing of a road fork in the forest. The drawing shows a forked creature resting by the side of the path in the forest. And for the image on the right, the prompt reads, pencil drawing, fork and forest. So there's no cutlery fork anymore, just some beams are left. For the rest, we see a path leading through the forest. I don't deny that these images display a certain aesthetic quality. However, it reminded me more of the little happy accidents of the TV painter Bob Ross. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. So the image is a surprise, which might inspire me, lead me somewhere I didn't plan to go. We can discuss the content of the images later. Initially, I'm more interested in the overall process of the creating the images. So we come to the third part. To close the circle of my argument, I will now address the problem of creation and growth as a topological one. In his book, Imagining for Real, Essays on Creation, Attention, and Correspondence, Ingold discusses 2 types of surfaces, a parchment and a surface of the earth. He cites a monk who compares field work with the writing of a manuscript. The ink is brought deep into the page, the letters are seeds in the ground. Ingold develops his anti-stratigraphic idea, illustrating it with a palimpsest. For economic reasons, a manuscript page like the one we see here was used multiple times. The written-on surface was scraped off until the ink had faded enough to write over it. While the old ink was in fact brought closer to the surface, the fresh ink ran deeper. And I like to quote Ingold here. Thus understood, both ground and page exemplify what architectural design theorist Lars Spybrook, inspired by the writings of Ruskin, calls deep surface, formed of forces that operate constitutively from the inside out and erosively from the outside in. Such surfaces are both of inestimable depth and limitless in their atmospheric reach. To venture upon such a surface as the wayfarer does, or the medieval reader of liturgical texts, is to inhabit an entire milieu. Both the page and the ground are more than a surface. They have changing depths. The concept of a deep surface leads Ingold to formulate his anti-stratigraphic concept. On the page, the upper layer is removed, causing deeper layers to rise from the depth, becoming the surface. The new layers, in this case ink, are then introduced into the depth. Of course, ink sinks into the material. This isn't a stratigraphic layering, so as a layering process. The new material is not just applied on top, covering up older layers, which then move deeper into the ground. By scraping the page, the old ink rose towards the surface. The new writing is a deposit in the depth beneath the older parts. According to Ingold's, stratification and deep surface represent two ways of speaking the mind. And he proposes two topological assumptions regarding the operation of memories. On the one hand, our mind, he understood as ground, contains layers of memories that arrange themselves in a stratigraphic way, layering on each other. Thus, experiences are stored in form of fresh memories on top of older ones. The latter, in turn, sink deep into the ground and may even become inaccessible. On the other hand, one could say that the mind has a deep surface that functions like the palimpsest. Old memories rise to the surface, and depending on how deeply they are rooted, disappear into thin air. In the meantime, fresh memories inscribe themselves in the depth of our mind. Much can be said about Ingold's theories alone. He discusses various concepts of surfaces and develops his own idea of an interface by distinguishing the terms between and in between. But I don't want to go into detail here, that would take us too far afield and miss the point. Instead, I want to take a closer look at our problem. Let us assume that the user interface for the image generator algorithm is the surface of soil we want to cultivate. Our ground is equipped with a fixed but functioning infrastructure. We can introduce information and intentions. It is therefore not a completely repellent surface. It's more than a concrete park where I can store my data, and more than a motorway along which I can quickly send information. The surface allows to access deeper areas which are linked to operational units. Besides that, our information and intentions are met with the result. Our input thus leads to an output. A dialogical situation arises. Dialogue here should not be confused with discourse, of course. Well, the ground spits out images that we can harvest, so to speak. So far, this metaphor sounds promising. It allows the human algorithm relationship to be interpreted ecological and hierarchically. The metaphor elevates the user to the privileged position of a gardener, farmer, or possibly plantation owner. No matter how far-reaching the AI performance, the question of what it can do or what it should be allowed to control lies in the hands of the farmer. So spoken with Marx, we own the means of production. It would only be a matter of experience and management to produce the desired objects. The metaphor is thus intriguing for anyone who wants to counter the Skynet doomsday scenarios of certain scientists, such as the youngest Nobel Prize winner, Geoffrey Hinton, who assumes that AI is not merely following rules, but that it resembles a rational being which understands. This brings us to the critical point that the gardener's metaphor might create a distorted image because it attributes organic and lifelike features to the algorithm. Terms like virus, hallucination, or evolution are used to describe the operationality of digital machines. They make computers and their programs appear as organic beings. One of those examples is the potential energy landscape, which resembles the epigenetic landscape introduced by Conrad H. Waddington. So according to this, the development of a living being proceeds like a ball rolling within the landscape Our formation is formed by attractors. There's a variety of attractors, such as DNA and instinct, but also environmental, social, or psychological aspects have impact. Here's a draft of an epigenetic landscape. The attractors underneath shaping the valleys, which will be the most probable way the ball will roll down. So the potential energy landscape of the learning or neural network learning algorithms is similar, except there's only one attractor, only one telos. Its learning is one-dimensional because it continuously strives to become more efficient and to reach its lowest energy state. This is certainly not the case of organic life. Organic phylogenesis and ontogenesis is full of inefficiency and waste. There's an incredible morphological, social, and cultural surplus. Also, most of us would agree that efficiency as sole telos does not necessarily lead to what is considered a good life. The epigenetic landscape of living being has many attractors. Our past, for example, is not a set of stratigraphic data, but a constitutive element that affects us in a non-linear way. But what is in fact the situation of the gardener? Just as with my work on the computer, I also rely on a matrix or infrastructure when gardening. I need a certain composition of the soil, good light, appropriate climate conditions, and so on. Is the ground prepared? I deposit the seeds, and with some time and care, I will receive an output. While the prompts which are deposited in the algorithm take shape in accordance with probability and efficiency, the organic seed undergoes many changes in accordance with its organic disposition and the environmental conditions. One obvious difference between the creation process of the algorithm and the plant is the growth that takes time. A grown individual undergoes morphological phases. A final or target state only emerges through an economic assessment. So only when I say there's a fruit has a particular form and this is the moment where I harvest it, there is a final state which we wish for. Otherwise, it's ongoing circling. So the algorithm, he understood metaphorically as ground, receives a seed with a telos. But this seed lacks something like an entelechy. If the program produces a new form, this seems to happen without going through a chain of morphological events. The generated image appears to us instantaneously. Looking at the dialogical relation of user and algorithm, it seems that the transformation takes place above ground. There is the act of re-entering new prompts in reaction to the output. The transformation expands over a period of time and owes itself to a dialogue between user and algorithm. In our case, growth is driven by the user, who repeatedly activates the algorithm. And like growing vegetables or flowers, creating AI images requires knowledge, experience, and diligence to truly produce something worth harvesting. One question arises here: how are the concepts creation and growth related? It can be stated that the algorithm produces new objects by recombining existing elements, but we also create new things through recombination. Ideas, concepts, or images are more often transformed than invented. Gilbert Simondon, therefore, speaks of an evolution of the technical object. Nevertheless, it is a legitimate question whether these new forms which arise as a product of recombination are really creations, that is, whether they are novelties or merely newness. I will not engage in the discourse on creativity. What is relevant for me at the moment, that we encountered a creative process that is dialogical. Ingold highlights, referencing Henri Bergson, by the way, the entanglement of active and passive participation in the creative process. Understood in this sense, the creator not only actively invents, but also somehow endures the creative process. The user conveys growth and thus endures and creates at the same time. I would like to remind of Joseph Weizenbaum, the inventor of the first language analysis program ELIZA. In 1976, he published Computer Power and Human Reason, From Judgment to Calculation, in which he attempts to resolve misunderstandings about the operationality of computers. Even after so many years of further progress in computer science and computer technology, his assessments continue to be relevant. According to Weizenbaum, intelligence is not a permanent property that can be measured independently of its reference system just by using a quotient. Furthermore, he states that creativity depends not only on the linear form of intellectual ability, but also on other modalities of thought, such as intuition or wisdom. In the case of the AI image generation, we have two modes of thinking. The user and the algorithm form a coupling, such a kinematic pair, like the bolt and the nut. So the program, with an accelerated combinational productivity, which is indeed impressive, has to undergo the input of the sometimes unpredictable, imaginative, and free-living being. The algorithms set up to follow the path of the lowest energy waste aim to eliminate exactly these elements of uncertainty. Therefore, it is only the coupling of user algorithm that leads to a weaving process able to create real novelties. As problematic the metaphor is, it does help to understand the creative process of the user algorithm pair. There's another reason for introducing it. It could encourage us to become responsible individuals who care, as Donna Haraway would maybe say. It seems not only justified, but necessary to insist on the user's agency and responsibility, because AI-generated material is part of our culture and therefore has at least the potential to be political. Technological systems that become established on such a large scale lead to an undesirable homogenization of rationality, whereby other ways of thinking are ultimately suppressed. Here we see an example that shows how badly cultivated most algorithms still are. So on the platform Midjourney, the picture on the right was uploaded together with the request to generate it more realistically. The generated images, however, turned out to be even more fantastic than the original one. It's simply a fact that the algorithm lacks the body, it therefore has no own phenomenological knowledge. It renders our reality into mere concepts. Apart from that, the data bank of images represents only parts of our life. Most of the content that ends up online is beautiful stuff. Understandable, after all, we want to capture the unforgettable moments with particularly beautiful images. We tend to retrospectively embellish the moment. I believe that if we keep on repeating and honing our fantastic desires, they will eventually become true, meaning that we will grow the bodies and become the persons who are currently being designed and generated by algorithms. So I'm almost on the end of my presentation, and I brought a quote of Weizenbaum that I believe to be fitting. The myth of technological and political and social inevitability is a powerful tranquilizer of the conscience. Its service is to remove responsibility from the shoulders of everyone who truly believes in it. But in fact, there are actors. Algorithms will access an increasing number of images and information. They will become more efficient in producing the desired output. But in the meanwhile, the quality of the soil changes. Repeating similar prompts over and over again does not necessarily bring the desired result. Algorithms should not be subject to a monoculture. As in single crop farming, it leads to unfertile soil that has been drained of its ability to mediate and bring growth. The user-algorithm dialogue needs time and care, and without diversity introduced by the gardener, no novelty will appear. We as users are the driving force, and it's up to us to till the ground and help to cultivate the algorithmic environment. I want to thank you for your attention.